Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. Now, one of the things about living in our modern world is the fact that everybody is on their smartphone. I mean, you can see it just as soon as you walk down the street. People are texting, they're messaging, they're taking photographs, they're talking. And a lot of people lament that because they think that, well, the most interesting stuff that used to happen on the street no longer does because everyone's fixated on that screen. And to some extent, I agree with you because I think that people interacting with each other is one of the things that makes life on the street kind of interesting. But when I thought about it, the reality is that street photography is always a reflection of the times in which the photographs are taken, whether they're 20 years ago, 30 years, 50 years ago, or 100 years ago. When you look at those street photographs, they really give us a sense of what life was like at that particular time. And I think that is just as much the case today, even with people on their phones and not really interacting with each other, and they're sort of oblivious to everything except their phone. I think that is actually something that's kind of interesting to document. But the challenge, as with anything, is how do you make an interesting photograph of someone looking at their phone? Because I see plenty of pictures of people on their phones, but there's nothing particularly interesting. And I think one of the ways to sort of approach that when you're out on the street is to not just think about photographing somebody on the phone. You have to think about everything else in terms of lighting, in terms of context, in terms of what the background, what the foreground is, shape, color, light. All of those things still come into play. All the things that play a role in making a good photograph are just as important when you're photographing someone who's out in the street who's on their phone. It's important not to lose sight of that. And I chose some pictures that I thought were really good images of people on their phone doing a variety of different things. And so let's take a look at that. The first image is by Bogaert. He shot this with a Leica M monochrome at 1/750th of a second at f11 at ISO 3200. Now, we have this guy here who's texting on his phone, completely oblivious to everything around him. But when I look at this shot, what he's doing is actually not especially unique. It's the common body language for anyone who's on their phone, texting or checking their emails, whatever it is. What makes the shot interesting is the overall framing. I like how the dark suit contrast with all the other tones in here except for the window frame here on the right hand side. I think that just in terms of tones, I think it's a nice little contrast between the left and the right here. And there's also this repetition of shape that happens throughout the thing, that happens throughout the frame. We have these rectangular rectangle squares that happen not only in the building but within the window here, in the sidewalk, and the frame here on the extreme left hand side. So what makes this image interesting here is this. We have this figure that's in the background here, and we also have his reflection in the pool of water there. That provides the image a nice sort of context, a sort of a counterbalance to what's happening with this guy here. Because I think that even though this figure is a very small element of the frame, for some reason it really adds a sense of depth to the shot. I really like it. It without this guy, I think it would just be just another picture of a guy checking their phone. As much as I like the overall framing here, especially with these rectangular shapes that happen throughout the frame, which adds a nice balance to the shot, I think that really works very nicely. But it's this guy in the background and his reflection in the water that makes the shot really, really interesting. I'm not exactly sure what that guy is doing in the back. Seems to be aware of the photographer, but that's not really what's key here. I think that just as an element in the shot that makes the shot interesting for me. I really like it because otherwise it would just be just another fellow checking their messages. But as we talked about it in a recent video, it's like the small things that we include in the frame can make or break a shot. And in this case, I think the figure in the background really makes the shot really, really interesting. So kudos to Andre for doing that. Now here's a shot by Kimberley Saros, shot with Olympus EM10 shot at 1/250th of a second at f4.5 at ISO 250. Okay, so this is about as common a scene as you will see with people on their phone. They're doing a selfie. The girl on the right is doing the duck lips for whatever reason. I never got that. And they're just smiling into the lens of the camera of her phone. And then we have this figure on the left-hand side who may or may not be with this particular pair. But I like the shot, not just because, these girls are looking into their phone, trying to look as cute as possible. They have their designer bags. I mean, you look at them in terms of their outfits, the way they're trying to look in the camera, in the photo, and you really get a sense of them, right? But the girl on the left, who seems completely oblivious to them, is really kind of an interesting counterpoint. Just like with the previous shot, the presence of something else other than, the people using their phone makes the shot interesting because it serves as a counterpoint. She seems to be, as far as style, kind of in line with what we're seeing with the girls on the right, with her blouse, with the pants that she's wearing, her hair, and she seems to be around the same age, which makes me assume that they were together. But that's sort of a moot point. But again, it's about what else do you include in the frame. The relatively shallow depth of field that we see here, and what was the f-stop that we're using here? About 4.5. Helps minimize the potential distractions of all these trees and foliage in the background. So that works really well to Kimberley's benefit in terms of drawing our attention to the three here. One of the other things that helps in terms of keeping our attention to them is stuff that we've talked about before, right? There's gesture here. The gesture of the hand extended out in order to take care of the selfie, and the girl's on the far right, the way she is lifting her left hand almost up to her chin, makes for interesting gesture. But look at sort of the girl on the far left. She's not doing anything with her hands. She seems to be just standing there. And I look more carefully, it seems like she doesn't have her arms in her sleeve of her sweat top or her hoodie. It seems like, I guess it was a little cold, so she actually has her arms underneath the hoodie that she's wearing, and I'm just picking up on that as I look at it a little more carefully. But look at it in terms of tones. I mean, the girls are the brightest elements in the frame, and the areas in the background are a little darker. The focus is right on these three as well. And of course, we've talked about the power of three. We have three faces here, and you navigate the frame really nicely. And one of the interesting things is because this girl is looking off frame, which is one of the things that we typically want to avoid in a shot, because we don't want people wandering off the frame. The girls on the right end up being pulling us back in, because even though this girl is looking to the left and out of frame, because these other girls are having interesting gesture, because they're brighter, they have the greatest point of contrast. All of those things help to draw us back into the frame, and there's this. Everything holds us in within the context of the frame, and it plays really, really nicely. But again, it's the common thing that we see all the time of people taking selfies. But I think that this succeeds in being an interesting photograph of that kind of moment. Here's a shot by Evi Herlyna, shot with a Sony RX100 at 1/30th of a second, f8 at ISO 1250. Now, every shot is shot from the perspective of being seated on the subway car in Tokyo, and very, very different perspective from what you're used to, which is usually about eye level. So she's shooting up at these two businessmen as they are on their phone. It seems like the guy on the left is probably watching a video, while the guy on the right is texting. And I like the way that they are framed in the shot. Even though we don't get the complete hand or phone on the guy on the right, you still get a sense of what's happening here. And look at the shot in terms of all the things that make a shot really interesting, right? We have great contrast, the darkness of the suit compared to the middle gray and the light tones of the subway car. We have repeating pattern from the handles in the subway car, these sort of triangles that repeat themselves throughout the frame. There are triangles that are created by the guy's arms on the left-hand side. You even see it in his tie. there's also a real interesting thing with the guy with holding the cup in his mouth. That's a gesture. Gesture is not just about something someone is doing with their hands. Gesture can be a thing like that, this sort of odd thing where this guy's hands are completely full. He's holding on to the handle for the subway. He's got this phone on his right-hand side that he's gazing at. He's got this, cup in his mouth. Makes for a very amusing and a very interesting moment here in this shot. But again, we have the counterpart on the guy on the right who's just texting. If this guy was just by himself in there, it still might be an interesting shot, but there's something interesting about having this other counterpoint there. But there's a third face in the shot, and if you look at the back of the frame, there's another face that is in this advertisement in the subway car. This smiling fellow who seems to be in a dark suit, or at least a dark shirt in the background. And for me, that provides this power of three. There are three faces in the frame, and there's an implied triangle created by these three faces, which I think is reinforces all the existing triangles that exist within the frame. There are the literal triangles that we're seeing in the frame, but there's also the implied triangles by the three faces, but also by the position of the arms and all these other things that sort of repeat themselves throughout the frame, making for a really, really interesting shot. And it's just Evi does a wonderful job here in terms of just owning the frame. I think that it's really nice the way this whole shot is built. It's slightly akimbo. It's not completely in line with the lines of the background of the vents, whatever they are. But I think that adds to the shot here. It's a wonderful, wonderful capture. And lastly, we have this shot by YBM, shot with a Leica M9 at 1/45th of a second at f1.7 ISO 640. Okay, so we have another shot of someone texting, right? But I really like this shot for a variety of different reasons. One of the things I'm always looking for when I see people on their phones is whether I can use the light from their phones as a light source for photographing the subject, because you'll get this glow on the person's face, and usually in low light situations or indoors, that's the only source of illumination to be had, and sometimes that can be a really interesting shot. That's not entirely the case here. There is some sort of illumination that's happening within the scene here, but we're still getting a good amount of light on his face directly from the phone, so that makes the shot really kind of interesting. But what makes the shot is, again, we got threes here, don't we? We have his figure here, and then right in the wall immediately behind him we have the reflection of him where his back is against the wall, and then there's a third reflection of him here on the right. So it seems like there's something on this side of the frame, just outside of the frame, that's reflecting his body and his face here again. I think it just works really, really nicely. Again, it's a guy texting on his phone or checking his email, whatever he's doing, right? In and of itself, that practice of looking at your phone, using your phone, that in and of itself is not particularly interesting. But what this photographer and all the other photographers have done is that they don't forget that they're trying to make an interesting and a good photograph. So they're taking a look at everything else that's in the frame and trying to use it to either complement or contrast the subject while they're taking a picture, checking an email, doing a text, doing whatever they are doing with their phone. They look at these people as an element within the frame, and that's ultimately what a good street photography is about. Sometimes it's not so much about the action that's happening in the frame, but how that action relates to every other thing that you're including in the frame. That's what makes a shot interesting, is if it offers a narrative, if it's telling a story, but it's also doing it with a creative visual flourish that makes the shot just interesting to look at. And lastly, what makes the shot really work is that we have this bright area behind him, which just does a beautiful job in terms of defining his body and his shape within the frame. It really does a wonderful, wonderful job. All right, hope you enjoyed that video. And if you're finding us for the first time and you would like to submit images to the Candid Frame Flickr pool, all you have to do is go to Flickr, do a search on the Candid Frame, and just ask to be added. We have a couple of thousands of people here who are submitting hundreds of images every week that I pull from to do these videos. So if you want to submit and start participating in our group here, please do. If you're on your phone, you may not succeed in being able to add for whatever reason, so you'll have to go on your browser on your computer in order to be added. But once I see your name up there, I'll probably get to it within 3 or 4 days and approve you to be in the group. And if you've found us for the first time and you've never heard of the Candid Frame, well, the Candid Frame is a photography podcast in which I interview photographers about their work and careers. I have over 300 interviews up and live for you to listen to, and you can find it at thecandidframe.com. And if you like these videos, please subscribe and spread the word. So thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next time.